about the authorship.
Whose authorship?
Like, who are these people? For example, we know that Matthew, maybe he was the guy who was collecting taxes. Maybe we can.
Why maybe?
Say that.
Why maybe?
Because when we check some references, it says it was written like many years after. So I think
when you say many years, how many years after?
Time.
How many years
maybe
after?
85 AD, which is
what date?
85 AD.
According to who?
50 years to the death of Jesus.
According to who? Where'd you get that date from?
Like, for example, when you check some references on maybe Wikipedia, something.
It's okay.
Like
Wikipedia is not God, not Gabriel, and it's not a prophet. What evidence that it was written 85 AD? What's the proof?
Okay, but then according to you, when was it written?
We have very good evidence. Very good evidence. Matthew was written in the 50s, within 20 years of the life of Jesus. And here's the evidence. Even the scholars you're quoting to me, they'll tell you Mark was written first, Matthew, then Luke and Acts. Okay? All right. Now, Luke and Acts, when you read the book of Luke and Acts, Acts ends with Paul, Acts 28, Paul is in prison. He's at Rome, he's in prison, he's about to see the emperor of Rome. That's where it ends. Now, here's why that's interesting. That same book of Acts talks about Peter, James, and Paul as the main characters of the book. Peter is the main character of the book. A lot is said about Peter. Then a lot is said about Paul. And then James, the brother of Christ, is mentioned as a very important figure. Okay, now, in the book of Acts, follow me. I'm trying to give you some reasons to see why these books are not as late as some of these skeptics who are atheists will tell you. In the book of Acts, it mentions the death of Stephen, who was a deacon, not very famous. The only reason why we know him is because Acts mentions he was killed. He was the first Shahid for Jesus. He was killed, right?
Yes, Stephen, yeah.
Okay, now, then it mentions in Acts 12, the brother of John, who wrote the Gospel of John, James, was killed by Herod. So now here are two people whose death are mentioned. But the death of Paul is not mentioned. The death of Peter is not mentioned because Peter was crucified in Rome, according to the followers of the, for example, you have the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, and the Tabi'un, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have in church history the writings of the Tabi'un. The Tabi'un. We have the writings still. Irenaeus, Polycarp, who was a Tabi, Ignatius, Clement of Rome. So I'm just giving you names. You can find them online. Their writings are online in English for free. But pay attention so I don't confuse you. Paul was Paul was beheaded. Peter was crucified. James was thrown from the top of the temple. He landed to the floor and they stoned him and killed him. Now, according to the dates of these events, when we compare what the Tabi'un say, the dates, James was killed around 62 AD. Peter and Paul were killed around 64 to 68 AD. And then the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. Okay, now, if Matthew and Luke, Acts, were written in 85 AD, that means it's written after the temple was destroyed, after Paul was killed, after Peter was killed, after James was killed. Why then does Acts not mention that Paul was killed, Peter was killed, James was killed, and the temple destroyed if Acts was written after these events in the 80s? Why does it end with Paul in Rome in house arrest, who hasn't even gone to trial before the emperor, when Acts would have mentioned that if that already took place?
Yeah, then it means it was written before his death.
God bless you with a genius mind, Omar. I mean that. You see, means it must have been written before, right? That means it must have been written before 62 AD, before these things happened. But if Acts is before 62 AD, Luke was before Acts. That means Luke would be at least in the 50s. But Matthew is before Luke and Mark is before Matthew. So now you push the Gospels within the years 40 to 62 AD, within 10 to 20 years of Jesus's resurrection.
Okay.
Do you know why Wikipedia? Let me tell you why Wikipedia and these sources, they say 85 AD. Do you know why?
I don't know.
Because in Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jesus predicts 40 years before it happened, the temple would be destroyed, Jerusalem would be destroyed. So these scholars don't believe in miracles. So they don't believe Jesus could have said it. So that means, according to their logic, Matthew, Mark, Luke must have been written after the temple was destroyed, and then they put in the mouth of Jesus predicting its destruction. In other words, they lied to make it look like a prophecy, but they only knew about the temple being destroyed after it was destroyed.
So it's because they don't believe in miracles. Right?
Man, God has blessed you with a shower. I mean that. See, you got it. But now, if you believe God and believe miracles, believe prophecy, of course Jesus could tell me what's going to happen 40 years before it happens, because God knows the future.